Hi. You're about to get a crash course on the Nueva research program, which is composed of the XRT, Project 80, Journal Club, and the Nueva Science Collective. But before we begin, I want to say thank you to three groups of people. First, Jeannie Garbarino and Bonnie Kaiser at the Rockefeller University, who generated one of the most powerful research programs I've ever seen. Tom Mejada, who built on that and generated a research program at the Pingree School. Amanda Alonso, who paved the way for the research program here. And the members of the Nueva Science Collective, specifically Jan Lehman and Rebecca Coquette, who have just done the legwork anytime we were buried. So there's three basic ideas I want to introduce you to. The first is the difference between research and science. Now, in the real world, those two things are pretty intermingled. However, at the high school level, there's a significant difference between them. Science, I'm going to use the example of biology, often taught in Biology 101, teaches things like mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell and the amygdala produces anxiety. Research, on the other hand, let's take the example of the amygdala and anxiety, would take physics, the fMRIs that produce brain scans, molecular biology, knowledge of the way molecules in the brain work, and psychology, the way human behavior works. Take information from all three of those places, put them together, along with a group of people who would then ask questions and generate research answers. So the fundamental difference between research and the sciences at the high school level is that research is the process by which we ask the questions and science is the answers. And I think the cool thing is that research is subject independent. You would never have any idea what subject you're going to need to learn in order to ask and answer a question in any given field. The second idea comes from thinking about what a successful researcher is. So to do this, we simply looked at a bunch of successful researchers. And one of the things that we saw they were able to do was to affect meaningful positive change in the world. And when we looked at three characteristics that they all had, we saw that there were a few. First, they could all dissect literature. They could do bench work, and they could storytell or communicate science really effectively. Now, there's nothing that is super interesting about this. Every high school science teacher in the US most likely teaches some or all of these concepts in their classes. However, this often comes at a cost to the content, which is generally the most important thing for these classes. So we started thinking, what if we took these three skills, pulled them out, and then generated programming that taught those specifically and had the content come secondary to the skill. And that's what we've generated here. We have the Journal Club, which dissects literature, Project 80, which communicates science, XRT, which does the bench work, and then the Nueva Science Collective, which works with all three groups. The Nueva Science Collective is composed of parents and scientists. It helps to lead, direct where those groups go. Sometimes they just push us when we can't get there ourselves. A second major idea comes from thinking about how we learn and the amount of intellectual capital it requires, as well as the amount of time it requires. When I think about it, some of the most important things I've learned while doing homework and watching a TV show, and I haven't learned from the homework, but instead from the TV show. Of course, I've also learned while doing nothing but dedicating my brain to some single problem for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. There are time commitments that I give to certain projects, and those time commitments produce different types of learning for me. So there are some things that I've learned from places that I go once a year, from places that I attend once a week, and then from class-like structures that I attend 2 or 3 times a week. Now, what might be kind of cool is to think of these two axes, commitment and intellectual engagement, and take the three structures, the demo, the club, and the class, and offer multiple iterations of them so that a student that doesn't have a lot of time could go to one thing once a year, or one thing once a week, or one thing 3 times a week, and then do that multiple times, allowing them to dive deep intellectually, but with different time investments. The problem here is that in order to dabble in a lot of things at the high school level, you need to commit a semester or a year in terms of a class. This is essentially what a structure looks like. We have this plane of intellectual engagement and time commitment. At one side, we have the first time demo, the thing that happens once a year that you go to once. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have the expert student who has taken the 3 times a week class for 3 years. This student, like I said, becomes an expert in their field. But this comes at a real cost. And that cost is teacher time. Of course, we would love to have student experts all over the place. But in our example, this might take 3 teacher years in order to generate. We have to teach a student for their first, second, and third year. So what if we thought about this a little bit differently? And this brings us to the last idea in the research program, the idea of the student learner teacher. So what if a student in their first year learned from the teacher and became a second year student, but then as a second year student went back and taught the first year student? Similarly, they would learn, become a third year student, and then go back and teach a second year student. And what you end up there is this cool hierarchy of teaching. You still end up with your student expert. You reduce the amount of teaching time that you have, and you've created a student learner and teacher. That's it for the crash course. That's all I needed you to understand. I hope you understood everything. And if you didn't, please try watching this again. And if I'm anywhere to be found, ask me, but be warned, I tend to babble when asked any questions about this stuff because I'm kind of crazy about it. See you soon. Bye.